Ready to start, please. Attention. Attention. Or if you're here in the French station, attention.
What is the symbol?
We're up to page 43.
Yes, we are.
Oh my God.
Right. Would you open up at page 43, please? There we're dealing with, as we closed last session, here now, about the angel's intellect. But God, according to himself, not according to some light, is intelligible. He is self-understandable and self-understood. There's no potency in God. When I said that on one occasion, it scandalized somebody. He's taking away the power of God. Pardon me. But God has an operative power, a power of operation, infinite. But potency, no, there's no potency in God because it has to be actualized. There's nothing greater than God, as we prove. Now, let's look at this again another way. Sense knowledge on page 43. Discovery of the principles involved using other examples. A tree in the forest that can be visible because it has form in a body. And all the knowledges we have must come from an information of the power, the knowing power. It must be informed by, for instance, sight has to be informed by the color red. And the thing in the forest can be visible, in other words, potentially visible, not yet seen. Illumination by light causes that it does be visible. In other words, actually visible. And a seer causes that it actually be seen. Then a tree falling in the forest is not actually hearable according to itself. But the carriage of sound waves to the medium renders it audible. And now it does be audible. It is actually audible. A present hearer now causes it to be heard or actually be heard. So the tree falling in the forest does make a sound. Now let's compare this with man's intellective knowledge. A tree can be understandable, intelligible, because it has form in a body. That is, according to it, this is on page 44 at the top. According to itself, it is not actually understandable because of the presence of matter. The form has to be abstracted. It has to be, in other words, as it were, photographed. But in the case of the intellect, the form has to be abstracted. So, as it is now, in the present of matter, matter is a hindrance to knowledge. Matter is a hindrance to lots of things. An apple tree would be a perfect apple tree because of the form, except that matter's present and deforms it in some way. Every tree would be every apple tree would be a perfect tree, but for the presence of matter. So we have to abstract that form, which makes, in other words, the principle that makes the tree be a tree. It makes us also be knowing a tree. So the agent intellect, our agent intellect, abstracts the form. And the reason of the agent intellect abstracting the form makes one person see it, another person not. Or understand it, and another person not. And that greater intelligibility or intellectuality is caused really by the disposing or the adequate or appropriate disposition of the internal senses, the four internal senses. That's what makes one person be able to see things better than another. Some people have good imagination, some people have none. Very little. Some people have good sensitive memories, others have very poor sensitive memories. But it depends not on the quantity of brain, it depends on the disposition of the internal organs, the internal senses, the 4 internal senses. So the agent intellect abstracts the form and presents the species in the possible intellect. Those 2 intellects, remember, are powers of operation of this human soul, the operative powers we call them. So the species is implanted in the possible intellect, and now it does be understandable or intelligible, actually intelligible. And the act of the knower, for the act needs an intellect which knows, the possible intellect then does the act of knowing. And the act of knowing is identifying the knower with the known. The tree does be understood. I've got explanatory notes there for you. But let's compare that. Is that reasonably clear, do you think? Somewhat. You've got to think about it. The human intellect that does the act of understanding is the possible intellect. It's called possible because it's possible to be all things. It's also called the patient intellect because it undergoes suffering of the reception. It can be actualized. So, the possible intellect does the actual act of knowing. And you don't know, you're not always conscious of these things because, it has to be dissected for us to understand this. The reason is it takes place so rapidly. But we're forced to admit this, that there is a superior power which brings it up to the level of the possible intellect. Otherwise, we can't explain it. Now compare that with the angelic intellect. The angel itself, which is a far higher form, living form, than anything else around us. I mean, it's above the bodily order. It's actually intelligible because there's no matter in it. There's no matter in its essence. Our essence is made of matter and form, which we call body and soul. But the angelic intellect has pure soul, pure form. But the angel needs to be moved from can understand to does understand. From can be understood to does be understood. Because there's no matter in it. It's in itself intelligible. Now, number 4, compare. God is not the form of a body and so is actually intelligible. Moreover, as Aristotle saw, God is actually understood according to himself. For there's no potency in God, for he is self-existent. So to say there's potency in him means that he has to go from can understand to does understand. He doesn't, for instance, know anything about time. I shouldn't put it that way, I'm sorry. We can't speak in terms of time with him. There's no yesterday and tomorrow with God. It's called eternity. In the case of angels, it's called Eve. Well, we won't go into that. It's not the proper place. So God is not the form of a body, and so is actually intelligible. Moreover, as Aristotle saw, God is actually understood according to himself, for there's no potency in God, he's self-existent. He must therefore be understanding and be understood, as Aristotle saw. That's not bad for an old pagan, you know. He's a pure active understanding of himself. Aristotle defined God as understand, the understand of an understand. The subject is a pure act of understanding, and the object of his act of understanding is also his act of understanding. There's the reference there for you. This means the object of God's act of understanding is his own act of understanding. He's not in potency to understand, but he is identified with his act of understanding. is pure act. Look at all the billions of people that have come and gone, and the billions of people in the world today, and the billions of pieces of sand. And one poor soul, a man said to me once, he said, "Oh, no intellect could think about all that." Well, no intellect that we know could think about it. He's right. On the other hand, when we know that it must necessarily be God's intellect, when we know that, holy mackerel, it makes one tremble at the knees to think that you even ever offended such a being. He's identified with his act of understanding. He's pure actuality. He's purely actually knowing, each one of us, at each act that we do, and each act that we will do. So I've expressed this another way, and you can look at that for yourselves. The colour on the wall and the power of sight, it's all there. I think we could leave that to your own reading. It says the same thing in just a slightly different way. But on page 45, the form as found in a body is potentially intelligible. When abstracted from the body by the agent intellect via the phantasm, in other words, the image, the form is moved from potentially intelligible to actually intelligible in the possible intellect. In the act of knowledge by the possible intellect, the form is moved from actually intelligible to actually understood. Thus, the knower is moved across from being potentially understanding to actually understanding. Therefore, for the form to be actually understood and the intellect to be actually understanding means that they are together exercising the same be, which is a knowing be. For be understood and be understanding signify a unity of be. Hence, I be the tree in the act of knowledge. I become the tree. And there's a beautiful passage in St. Thomas, I think it's in the De Veritate, the Treatise on Truth, question 8, I think. I've forgotten now. Anyway, I'll have to look it up for you. And St. Thomas mentions that we have the lowest of all intellects. That great gap, all intelligence between us and God. We have the lowest of intellects. And we're so limited, our being, to merely being this being, and you are merely that being, we make up for our limitation by receiving the being of all other things through knowledge. It's a beautiful thought. We can know every being through knowledge. I remember a farmer in Australia. He was a Czechoslovakian farmer. We went out hunting one day. And he said, "I see a little animal," he said, "here sometimes on the rock. He has 4 legs, or they seem to be like a duck." "Ah, it's a platypus." I said, "It's a shy animal. But boy, they're very active, wonderful swimmers, etc. They have webbed feet like a duck. They bark like a dog, little bark. They burrow like a water rat. They make a nest like a bird. Poison glands or spurs behind the 2 back legs. In fact, this poor thing doesn't know what the hell it is."
Don't forget lays eggs.
And lays eggs is like a bird, yeah. And I've sat and watched one play for quite a long time. But he was quite enthralled by this. So much so we were getting through a fence, and I raised one foot on the lower strand of wire, and I raised the other one for him to go through. He had a shotgun and I had a rifle. And when I was getting through, the shotgun's facing straight at me. The first rule in hunting is never allow your rifle to face somebody. Holy mackerel. My dad would have had a fit if he saw that. I said, "Please point that away." The slightest jar and he could have blown me up to pieces. You could have had a piece each then. Not on Fridays. So the knower is moved by the presence of this form from potentially knowing to actually knowing. But we make up for our own form. You see, the reason is we've got no forms in our mind. Aristotle and Anaxagoras speak of the mind being nothing before a form is in it. It has no nature. It's merely a potency of the human soul, or of a doggy soul, but for the human soul when it's intellect. And we have no nature. The thing is potential towards all natures. Therefore, there's none in its being. Glass vase, or I hear people calling it a vase here. How do you pronounce that here?
Vase.
Vase, do you?
Depends how expensive.
Very well put. Anyway, the thing about the vase/vase is that if it's blue coloured, it can't light, then everything that goes into the vase appears to be blue. Well, if the intellect had a nature of its own, everything it knew would be individuated by that nature. We couldn't know universals. All be individuated by that nature. Everything would come into it in terms of that nature that's in the intellect. But the intellect has no nature. In order to dominate, that's the word that Anaxagoras, remember his primitive Greek, so-called primitive, he's talking in terms of words right at the beginning of philosophizing and didn't have sufficient apparatus yet, terminology. And he called it, in order to dominate, it has to have no nature, because it's possible to know all things. And Aristotle goes on to prove that therefore the human soul is immortal from that. And he was right. St. Thomas elaborates it even further. And then when Woodbury draws it out, we'll see. We've seen some of that. We'll see more of it. Yes, Dennis.
This intellect that you're referring to it as a blank slate. Is that different than our instinct?
Well, instinct's a vastly different thing. Instinct is an inbuilt part of our nature, which has been planned. It's sort of pre-programmed, as it were. Like, for instance, you remember we were dealing with the spirituality of the intellect, or when we were dealing with the instinctive activity of animals, we dealt with that. What the hairy Ammophila, for instance, a wasp does, it sees a caterpillar and it compresses the seventh ganglion. The caterpillar is now frozen. It can't move. And it takes it and puts it into a little burrow which is prepared, lays its eggs in that skin, the folds in the skin of the frozen caterpillar, and when the young are born, young wasps are born, they have fresh meat and warmth. Now, the father is dead because the mother's eaten him, but the mother now goes off and dies. There's no one to teach the young. They do exactly the same thing again. They do exactly the same. They've been isolated, and this has been shown. It's not a decisive action of the caterpillar, the young caterpillars, of the young wasps. It's something which is built into their nature. It's fixed that they always do that. It's not remarkable what they do. What is remarkable is they never do anything else but that. That's the point. And because of that, we declare it instinctive. It's not thought out. It's pre-planned. It's like a computer, so it's programmed to do something in a certain way, you see? So, instinct is the will, for instance. The human will has a love of good, no matter where we find it. And here's an instinctive act. I remember standing near Ioannina, in the north of Greece, and on mountains, there's up on a crag, there was a monastery there, and they pulled themselves up by rope. And we were watching the sunset, and it was an extraordinary colouring that came about in the sunset. And that brought a lift within us. Probably you've all experienced that, seeing a sunset or a sunrise. And Schubert was singing, "When Phoebus begins arise, hark, hark, the lark on every bough," something like that. Anyway, we get a sort of an inside lift because of that. That will be instinctive. For the human intellect gets a tremendous love of the good and the truth and the beautiful. And the good, the true, and the beautiful. The beautiful is made up of the good and the true, you might remember from metaphysics. Because things are truly what they are, and because they're good, in other words, desirable, therefore they're beautiful. So that's a certain instinctive act there in the intellect and the will. If you like, they're instinctively seeking truth and seeking goodness. Yeah.
You said the intellect has no nature of itself? When we take things in, does it form a nature?
Yes, that gives it a nature now. It gives the nature of the understood. It's sort of, as it were, the nature of the intellect is man, the universal. As they all saw, as if it did have a nature of its own, then it couldn't be other natures. It would interpret everything in terms of its natures. There is this objection, all right, what about universality? That's a nature of the intellect, in a way to impose universality on things. That led Kant astray, actually. No, but the intellect doesn't have a nature other than being the intellect. In that sense, you could say it's got a nature. But it doesn't have other natures. Not till it gets a nature from something.
This is a leap, but part of the action of society is to form good natures in man by putting into the intellect.
Oh, I see, yes,
Like
yes.
models
You
or-
could say that, yes. It's living in society helps us form good concepts and therefore good natures. Living in society, but fully living in society, not partially living as most people do. I mean, look at that meeting that was shown on WNED the other night. That woman who fought against, in England, that formed an organisation against obscene and brutal television. And fellas came to a meeting and said, "We want sex, we want sex." Well, you can imagine how lacking in full humanity those poor souls are, those fellas. How lacking. Are they getting good concepts? Hardly. They're de-educated. That's what the problem is. That's what we claimed in Australia. The University of Sydney specialises in de-educating students. And today I'd apply that to most universities. Most universities in the world today. I've forgotten his name now. It was a Gélère, came from France and gave us a lecture in Ottawa. I was there. I remember his words. I could almost, if I could hear them say them now. En Europe, la philosophie est morte. In Europe, philosophy is dead. There's no philosophy in Europe today. All the great universities, look at Paris, what it was and what it is. And one of the students in America, as a matter of fact, one of the faculty rather, and Peter McCormick called out, "Hey, monsieur, pourquoi vous trouvez-vous ici ce soir? Why are you here tonight?" He said, "Pour les funérailles," for the funeral. He had a joke back at him, at Peter. That's the sort of thing that the world is lacking in philosophy. Do you know what people are saying? I'm hearing this. This is what I'd say. They're not quite right. But it's the way they see it. You're the only one, they say to me, that gives out solid Thomistic truth. Well, there was a time, I remember 25, 30 years ago, people say, "Yes, I'm a Thomist, but don't tell anybody." Well, to hell with them as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to boast about it, if you like. There's more richness in St. Thomas, one page of St. Thomas there is in the whole of the universe of philosophers. Woodbury said if he had his way over again, he said to us years ago before he died, he said, "I'd spend the rest of my time studying the Summa and Cajetan's commentary on the Summa." Cajetan was a great man, Cardinal de Ville, Thomas de Ville. He was a commentator. There have been three or four great commentators: John of St. Thomas, Cajetan, Bagnès, Ferrari, who've commented on St. Thomas, and their works will be known for the rest of time. I heard of somebody practicing their Latin by translating poetry. I said, get in and do something worthwhile. Translate Bagnes into English. Translate Cardinal de Vio into English. So, anyway, I think, did I answer that adequately, do you think?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. I didn't think so, but you did. Who said that? I was not sure whether I had answered it. So, the form has to be actually understood. That is knowledge. The identify, when the knower knows he's got the identity of that object. He sees the object. Now, as that beautiful text of St. Thomas says, now we make up for our limitations. We become all things. I think I mentioned once before, Shelley, one of my students at University of Ottawa, wrote this beautiful poem, which I had published. I should bring it in sometime. I once was an eagle, I soared into skies on high, something like this. Then I once was a whale, I roamed the seas afar. This kind of thing she went on with. She was inspired by a lecture I gave on this one day. So, hence the theory of knowledge on page 45. The theory of knowledge, oh wait, did I? Yes, I dealt with the other, didn't I? Actually understand, yes. The theory of knowledge is reducible to the theory of potency and act. The agent intellect is active, and what have I done here? Yes, abstraction, it abstracts the universal. So, the agent intellect has to imprint on the passive intellect, has to imprint this, the form. The agent intellect is necessary, for image cannot produce an effect beyond its own power. The image is singular, the concept is universal. Even if it's a vague image, there are some philosophers and psychologists have said that the image is the concept is just a vague image. It's as if we we'll come to this very shortly and as we go a few pages more, that as if we put, say, a grey blanket up against the wall, and every one of us stood in front of it and was repeatedly exposed to this. The film was exposed to that with a photograph. And it was a sort of a vague general photograph of all of us. Some are taller, some are shorter, etc., etc. As if we're vaguely a common image. That's what the universal is, according to them. They can't conceive of it any other way. Well, that's hardly true, unfortunately. So, I've summarized that in a way on page 45, right in the middle there. Now, the express species, there's a difference between the impress species and the express species. Now, remember what the species is. It's the look of the thing. So first, for me to know the tree out there, I have to have an imprint. That's the impress species. Then what I understand, I express in the possible intellect. How I understand it. I know it as an apple tree, certain size, beautiful, etc., etc. So the intellect, although that would be too particular, that one, but I know that tree as a tree. I know it as a vegetative being. I know it as a living being. All those things we split up in the mind. It's not split up out there, but we split them up in the mind. We have different concepts of it. What is a mammal, for instance? It's something that has what mama has. In other words, breasts. Feeds the young with the breasts. And incidentally, the platypus has little glands. The monotremes, platypus, and the spiny anteater in Australia, the echidna, they feed the young out of little glands, milk secreted out of little glands in the skin. And they belong to the mammals. They're one branch of the mammals that I think the third one is extinct, if I remember correctly. Those two, the spiny anteater, I've seen them, and the platypus. They're extant, as they say, not extinct. So, but we understand it. We understand this animal as a mammal. And we split it up in, say, egg-laying, mammal, this, that, and all the other. We split it all up in the mind. But there's an image, and then the mind does this, goes to work on that image, then forms other concepts out of that one image. So if we come down to express species, the express species is all those concepts we form out of that image. We express now how we understand it. The impress species is impressed into us, but we express it the way we understand it. For instance, a mammal I know is a milk producing thing. If I was thinking in terms of the platypus, I'd think of an egg-laying animal. It's another kind of animal. But it's not all split up out there, but it gets split up in the mind into these expressed species. So why is an expressed species there? Because to have the imprint of what's out there and to have it expressed within us in the manner in which we understand it. So the expressed species can be brilliantly conceived by some people. They can see something and then suddenly get an insight, like a physicist can get an insight into some way something's operating. Look at they're trying to explain the wave theory or the corpuscular theory of light and all that sort of thing. They're looking at it different ways. They're ways of expressing how it is out there. But how is it really out there? Darned if I know. I don't think anybody else does. All we know is sometimes it appears like an angular theory, wave theory, another time as if it's lumps of something, a corpuscular theory. So these are all conceptions in the mind of the way that we understand things. So there's the reason why we have this express species. The thing known is not according to itself actually intelligible. It requires a mental word. 2, the known must be present to the knower. 3, must be present in proportion to the knowledge. This is all expressed in the mental word, the concept. Now the windows, the senses are windows of the soul. Remember the analogy I've mentioned before. There are 5 external senses, or 6 depending which way you divide them. It's like 5 men coming into the room carrying heavy boxes. All they know is that they are heavy boxes. The senses see things like that. They just know in terms of colour, in terms of sound, etc. But we know they're bringing these boxes into us. We know what they are really. They're boxes of gold bars. So, likewise, the external senses bring the colour of the tree, the sound of the tree, but the intellect grasps the notion of treeness. The intellect sees the interior parts, as it were. So, got that analogy down there. So the role of the possible intellect on page 46. This is the intellective power which receives the production of the agent intellect. It receives the impress species from which it expresses the express species. The possible intellect is possible to be all things, just as the sight is possible to be all colours, the hearing to be all sounds, and so on. It is passive yet active. And I've got some readings down there. Then I've got the little problem. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Or if a man talks in a forest and his wife is not there, is he still wrong? So, there it goes, my friend. Now, some of this is not ideally understood by everybody, so just grasp what you can. And it will take time. Excuse me. It does take time for some of this to dawn on you. It takes months sometimes in a course for it really to dawn on you. I remember saying to Woodbury when I was in the first year, I was at the Aquinas Academy in Australia, which, by the way, I now, after many years of knowledge and reflection, can confirm that it was probably the leading school of its time. It was crushed by one man. I wouldn't like to be in his boots when he has to face his master. Or maybe Woodbury will beat him to it and punch him in the nose. But I remember when I said to him that my outlook was starting to change. I'm developing a different outlook, a different understanding. He said, that's it, that's coming to you, you're getting the dispositions. First of all, you get the dispositions, you're being disposed. Then later you get the habit. That comes. The important thing is don't give up. Don't give up. You're capable of it. It only takes common sense in many ways. So now we go to page 47. The term of intellective knowledge. What is intellective knowledge? What does it end up in? How does it terminate? Well, D1 there, the reality of the bodily world as term, which is immediately known. When I say immediately, through the senses. The object of the intellect is being, that is, whatsoever has the character of being. If it's something which is existing, it's knowable. And the intellect can know it. Well, I don't say it knows it adequately, completely, extensively, but it knows it as something existing. Look at children watching television. I remember going into a home of some friends here in Niagara Falls when they lived here, and they said, I walked in there one night, I said, they're looking at television, and their eyes are almost popping out. What's going on? Oh, there's a being out there. A being. Well, I said, what's a being? And luckily they didn't say bean. But anyway, a being is that which is. What is? Whatever is. That which bees. Having existence. The intellect can know it. We can know God, but never adequately. That's why it's eternal vision. For eternity, you still be like that. You don't know it, you don't completely know it. You're being fed, and why it absolutely fixes us. But something which has an essence, a nature, a quiddity, quidditas in Latin means whatness. A thing or something, they're all saying the same thing, looked at from slightly different ways. The predicate being is said analogically of each thing. That is, substance is a being, colour is a being, shape is a being, time is a being, action is a being. There are 10 modes of action, substance and 9 accidents. We studied that before.
10 modes of being.
10 modes of being, yeah. And since they have the idea of being contained in them, that they are beings, therefore they're knowable. The intellect knows things in terms of being. That's all it might know. Like these two boys watching this television. They had no idea it was out there, but they just knew there was a being out there. And they thought a being meant something like a spooky thing, something that was ready to, what my dad used to call a bitey, come ready to bite you, something like that. So the essence says the whatness of the thing, and the existence says whether it be's. What kind of bee it's got. Is it a real bee or a thoughty bee? Just one that's thought into existence, or what? Imaginary being? But intentionality is the secret in knowledge. We have this form in the knower, the knowing form, and the mind stretches out, tends to. Tendere means to stretch. Look, I'm stretching on my toes. That's a tendency. I'm tendential, as it were, rising in being. Tendential means it's coming to be. Like we call the embryo a tendential being, going towards being. So the predicate being is said analogically of each thing. Substance is a being, colour is a being. That means this. Substance is relation to is, page 47, remember, substance is related to is, as colour is related to is in, And shape is related to is in. Is in a substance. But it's a different mode of ising in each one. So substance is related to be, and all these others are related to substance. That's analogical. In other words, they're all alike, yet there's some unlikeness. All alike with greater unlikeness. Now what about things, knowledge of things higher than man? Or even some things lower than man. Matter, for instance. It's not a being. Matter, by the way, remember, when a scientist uses a word, be careful. He may not be using it the same way as the philosopher. Now, what does he mean by matter? He means bodily things generally considered. That's not what the philosopher means by matter. He means this. Whatever receives form is called matter. That's what the philosopher means, always. Whatever receives a form. Sometimes we can use terms in a way that don't pertain to other sciences. For instance, here's a man who's sleepwalking and he shoots somebody. Now, materially, he's committed murder. Formally, he's innocent because he's walking in his sleep. So, matter and form play a different part in the moral order. Somebody can even go out and rob a bank in his sleep. Materially, he's robbed a bank. Formally, he's innocent if he was truly walking in his sleep. So, matter which is not a being, but is a principle of bodily beings, and is therefore in a sense lower than a being, is in itself unknowable, since it lacks the fullness of being. Form is its co-principle, and is the principle whereby a being is knowable. Matter is knowable only through form as its co-principle. It's the form which is the secret of knowledge, not matter. And that's why we have all this great dispute about how do we get the universal. I think we'll finish there, my friends. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.